Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the first meeting of the Scrutiny Committee External of the new term after the elections. I'm Brian Perry, Democratic Services Manager. I'm just going to outline the procedures that we're going to follow this morning, and then I'll ask the convener to start the meeting. So the meeting is a hybrid meeting. Some members are in the room and some members are joining us online, and we have officers joining us online as well. Can I just ask members in the room when they're speaking to make sure they use their microphones, switch the microphones on so that people can hear us. If you can't hear us, if you're joining remotely and you can't hear us, if you could just let us know so we can turn the sound up. With that, I'll pass over to convener, Councillor Brown, and she'll take us through the agenda.
Thanks, Brian. First point of the agenda is the minutes of the previous scrutiny meeting held on the 10th of February 2022. Does anyone have declarations of interest?
So we'll just check quickly that the members are happy to approve the minute of the last meeting as a correct record. Appreciate not all members were on the committee before, but we have a couple of members who were before. So you're happy with the minute that it's a correct record?
Agreed.
And I think, as the convener said, we'll just move on to declarations of interest. If any members have any interest they wish to declare on any items of business in the agenda, which is essentially the next report on following the public pound, could let the convener know just now. Don't see any hands, so that's fine. And the last procedural before we start is, I should have said at the start, we have an apology from Councillor Redmond who can't join us this morning. So with that all done, into the meat of the business, which is item on following the public pound, community development, and introduction by Robert Naylor, Director of Children's Services. Check Mr. Naylor can hear us. He's on mute. I'm not sure if it's coming across.
Apologies, Brian. Yes, I can hear you. I'm going to pass over to my colleague Mark Meehan. Take us through the report.
Thanks, Robert, and good morning, everybody. This report outlines the Council's community development priorities and 4 external third sector projects that are funded from Children's Services and from Housing and Corporate Services as part of that. The report takes you in section 3 through describing that the monitoring and scrutiny and funding arrangements that are in place for the 4 projects, and it describes within the report the long-term value of the projects and acknowledges some of the challenges that they faced and the fiscal restraints that they faced over the last several years, and also working through the pandemic and how they're supporting others to recover from the pandemic. And in section 4, it describes the type of policy context that the projects are working in, and that community land development and community development is working in, and that includes the Community Land Development Regulations 2013, which has now led us on to having Falkirk CLD plan. Also describes the Community Empowerment Act and the contribution that the projects make to that. And certainly by funding the local organisation, the council is really taking positive action to ensure that everyone has a chance to achieve the vision as described in the Falkirk plan and Falkirk CLD plan. And it describes that in section 4.6 and 4.7. In 4.7, it describes the level of funding that's given for each of the projects, and I'll describe the projects. Denny Lonehead Community Limited, they get £11,330. Denny Community Support Project, they get £23,620, and the Workers Education Association get £22,280, and CVS Falkirk and District get £72,940. I've added an additional information in about CVS and the wider Falkirk Health and Social Care Partnership in section 4.9, describing other funding that's provided to CVS and to the third sector, and that level of funding is reported to the Scrutiny Committee in previous meetings by the Integrated Joint Board, but I wanted to acknowledge it within this paper here just now. And there's appendices for each of the organisations that describe the type of work they've been doing in from the 1st of April 2021 to 31st of March 2022 in detail. I don't know if you want me to go through each of those individual reports. My colleague Jennifer Kerr's here from Housing and Communities to describe CVS's appendix if you want us to go through each of these individually with you.
Mark, if you could go through that, that would be great.
Okay, I'll kick it off by talking about Denny Lonehead Community Hall Limited. That it's a bit like a thing. It was formerly known as Archibald Russell Community Hall, which was a hall which was built about 20 to 25 years ago through planning gain up in the Denny Lonehead area. As I said before, it's funded for around about £11,200 odd, and you can see the purpose of the funding, why it's given and what it tries to do, and in the report. And you can see the themes and what it contributes to the Falkirk Plan themes and outcomes. If you carry on through the report, it takes you to service delivery, and it describes a lot of what Denny Lonehead Community Hall and the volunteers and the management committee up there have been doing, and particularly since we're trying to recover from the pandemic. It's meeting the committee that they're describing that there's been a slow take up from centre users. That was pre-pandemic, especially in older people, and I've decided myself on that because I'm over 50 myself, but particularly older groups the numbers have dropped. However, the committee envisages that there'll be a recovery from that in the coming months as people start to more socialise together. And you can see that Denny Lonehead Community Hall have provide food provision from the hall as well to 63 families per week, which is quite a large number, and this has increased by 20% in the last year. And they respond not just to food, they're providing clothing and guidance and signposting to disadvantaged people, disadvantaged families. Feedback from the committee is that this will continue. They see this continuing to rise as the cost of living increases take place and take hold within their community that they're serving during the winter of 2022. So it's a well-valued service that they provide up there. And they also do a lot of work with other food pantries in the area, and they lead the consortium that has a food pantry consortium for the Denny Lonehead, Denny and Hall Glen and Camden Langley's Grangemouth areas. However, this funding is due to end in the 31st of March, and they were looking to integrate work with Fourth Environmental Link on their Falkirk Food Futures project, so they can sustain a lot of that work and keep that going. It details the type of groups that meet weekly within the hall. As you can see, there's an extensive list of groups that meet there, and it's booked out nearly every weekend for parties and celebration events, so they can income generate from there. It details the type of work that they're doing, how it contributes, as I said before, to the Falkirk Plan, and they're very keen to recognise and have valued that type of work, so they work with us on a regular basis. We meet with them on a monthly basis, but formally 3 monthly to monitor the joint working agreement that we've had. And during those meetings, that the group have been very aware of the fiscal demands and challenges that the council's facing, and they do raise with myself and Frank McCord, who also meets with them, the challenges that brings with them and the insecurity that brings to the organisation. However, they do secure external funding, and they're working hard to do that as best that they can. And some of the external fundings detailed within there, it's around about £17,000 they raised last year. They've got operating costs of roughly £40,000, so the money that the council provides, £11,000, contributes to those overall running costs, and the income generation brings the rest in, as well as external funding. So if you've got any questions on Denny Lonehead, I'm very happy to take that now, or if you want to wait to the end, it's entirely up to yourself, convener.
Members would like to ask any questions?
Yes, I've got a question. Just say, Mark, thank you very much for your report, and it's really good to hear what's happening across the Falkirk Council area and all our communities. I do have a question on this regarding this hall, the Archibald Russell Hall, known as Denny Lonehead Community Hall. It's actually on page 19, and you've mentioned in your report It's been nearly a year since groups started to use the centre, which is probably the same for a lot of groups all over the area. I know what you say in the over 50s age range. This has been particularly slower for the over 50s. So I would like to find out, you say you envisage, however, I would like to find out what process is in place to encourage this cohort of people to return to make the community hall inclusive for all. That's one of my 2 questions. Do you want the second question just now?
I'll take your first one if that's all right. I'll just take the first one by one. Yeah. Speaking to the committee, they recognised that there was a slow uptake from the over 50s coming back, and they actually contacted a lot of them by phone and also went to visit them to see if there was any support that they could offer that could bring them back out. And I think it was all down to people's confidence in that age range. They weren't too confident about coming back out and mixing with other people as well, and they were not convinced that COVID had gone away completely, if that's the way to describe it, and that they would still be susceptible. A lot of them had underlying health conditions, as you can imagine. And what the committee has been doing is actually trying to set up smaller groups rather than larger groups like was pre-pandemic, so that people build confidence and can come out, and they've tried to increase the number of groups but keeping them very small. And they, after speaking to a lot of the users and speaking to others who were previous users, they've indicated that they feel a wee bit more confident and they'll start to gradually come back to begin to access them. But a lot of it is face-to-face contact, councillor, that they've been having. That's
reassuring. Thank you, Mark. My second question is still on page 19. You say there, as most weekends, the hall is booked out for parties and celebration events. I believe the hall generates income from this. And I was wondering if the case could be expanded to generate more income. Has that been looked at? And has there been a review of charges recently? I mean, that's in view of maybe there's going to be a lack of sourcing of funding in future, potentially.
It's a really good question, and the management committee at Denny Head continually review their charges, and they benchmark it against other neighbouring halls and centres to set those charges. They are very conscious that they don't want to price themselves out of the market, if that's the right term to use. So they try to ensure that they can offer the use of the hall and other meeting rooms at a reasonable price, so that it wouldn't exclude people who maybe haven't got the means to take out the hall. And they actually price the hall at weekend hires very, very reasonably. I would say I think it's about £12 an hour that they offer that up. And the management committee, to keep it at that rate, they undertake a lot of the cleaning and tidying up duties and things like that at the hall. But they do regularly review the pricing structure, but they're minded that they're trying to serve a community that has challenging fiscal priorities within each family as well, and they don't want to price themselves out of the market.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Balfour.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, just a question on page 19. It mentions the cost of living crisis at the moment. There's obviously going to be further increases in fuel costs and whatever coming up very soon. It's very worrying. So how has this been affecting people so far? And are they going to be able to cope with the increase in people that are going to need help going into winter?
I can answer that in 2 ways, Councillor Balfour. The feedback that they're getting through the food bank that they run at the hall is that people are very worried about the future in terms of what money they have and what money they can spend, and they're reporting that they're having to reduce their heating and electricity usage, consciously making that decision. And a number of people are reporting that they're actually switching their meters off in the evening so that they're not actually keeping stuff running, so that they can keep that going. That's coming back through the committee. And the committee see the need for their food bank and food pantry provision as increasing over the winter, as it really starts to bite. And they've been speaking to other food banks about how they're going to manage that and how they can secure additional food, and they're seeking, and it comes down to seeking grant funding from other external sources to see if they can offset some of the increased costs that the hall would take to run. For example, further demands on food provision, also the heat and lighting of the hall, it'll increase by 30%, and they're having to work to find external funding to provide that. They're certainly taking a different model about when they're talking of getting stuff for the food pantry. They're also going to be adding into that external funding package an increased heating and lighting cost to run the food pantry, so they're building that into the complete package as well. So that they never thought about this previously, they just thought it would run within the centre as is, but now they're having to recognise that there's going to be increased costs as a direct result of running the pantry. So they're trying to take a much multiple approach to it, Councillor Balfour, if that answers your question.
Okay, thanks. Just one other question. There's going to be an issue, obviously there's been an issue before with people actually cooking or heating food. So there's going to be a much increased issue now because of the cost of electricity or whatever. So is there a plan in place to do like cold food packs and things like that people don't need to heat, or something that can just be microwaved or things like that?
Yeah, they do offer different types of food provision within that, and they do get into conversations about how people can maximise their income, so that this benefit advice, etc., is tailored to not just the provision of food. There's also, they encourage people to use slow cookers, which don't use as much electricity and that type of thing. And air fryers are the same. So they're actually looking at a provision that can lend people, slow cookers and lend people air fryers. So they're trying their best to try to do that, as are all the food pantries and food banks as well. They're all offering that service as well, Councillor Balfour.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Aitchison.
Yeah, I don't know if it would be pertinent to ask Robert Naylor a question about his original report. Would that be all right? It's a point on 4.9, Robert. It says over and above the allocation, Falkirk HSCP allocated 157,000 to Falkirk Council to support HSCP community learning and development posts to help develop capacity within communities. Could you maybe expand that a wee bit and tell us what the potential services could be, or what's going to be on offer?
Thank you, Councillor. Again, I'm going to pass over to Mark, who could give you the detail of what that resource has been used for.
So the Health and Social Care Partnership fund 3 community learning and development staff that are housed within community learning and development children's services. They are particularly focused on working with target groups to look at their health inequalities within each of the areas, the localities. So we've got a worker in each of the 3 localities that take forward that type of work. So for example, those staff are working with elderly groups, people with disabilities, people with sensory and hearing impairments. They're also working with a number of youth groups who have disabilities as well, and obviously the elderly, to try to develop their own services rather than being reliant on statutory services. It's very much taking a community development approach to that. I don't know if that answers your question, but the £157,000 is to pay wages for the staff.
No, that's perfect. That's more enlightening than what the sentence says in the paragraph. Thank you. Second question, Mark. Some groups may have stopped since the pandemic. Do the committee have they been re-evaluating what they have on offer, and have they got any potential new services that they wish to offer the community?
Yeah, they continually work with myself and Frank to identify emerging needs, and also what groups have sort of fell off the table. But to be honest with you, a lot of the groups, there's an increase in groups listed there than what was pre-pandemic. So there's more actual groups listed there, and a lot of them are, the committee's been very keen to income generate because they recognise that they had a loss of income during the pandemic that have to now offset as well because they've dug into their reserves. So there's more groups there. In terms of emerging need, they're particularly looking at work with young people, but it's not centre-based work, it's more on outreach, detached type work and engaging with young people in the immediate area. They're finding that a lot of young people are hanging about positively around about the centre, but they're not coming into the centre for whatever reason, and it's maybe because there's play equipment and activity equipment in the area, and that young people are accessing that. But the management committee feel as though they would benefit from some youth work input, so they're working with our service to begin to explore how they can source the funding to do that and to take that forward for themselves.
Brilliant, Mark. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Do any members have any more questions? We can move on to the next report, please, Mark.
No problem, convener. So the next report is Denny Community Support Project, which is based down at Bridge Crescent in Denny. And as you can see, their overall aims are listed there. I won't go through them, and I won't go through the how they contribute to the Falkirk plan, but it's detailed well there. The committee will note that the Denny Community Support received £23,620, and they have had that figure for the last 4 years. 5 years ago, they received £28,000 roughly. And within section B, in the service delivery aspect of this, there's a wide range of service and groups provided by Denny Community Support, and that's listed there. A couple of years ago, actually 3 years ago, the committee actually folded, and we worked with local people to bring another committee in and worked with them to build their capacity and confidence and competence to really run the project again. And a lot of the groups had fell away as a direct result of that mass management committee the disbanding and resigning. So the new committee's had quite a bit of work to do, working with ourselves to attract new organisations and agencies back in to use the flat there. And you can see the extensive range of organisations that use that. The management committee take on a very enabling role and try to be very positive and responsive to emerging community needs, and work really clearly with a range of partners. And they've worked really clearly with, Forth Valley NHS, a range of organisations that support ethnic minorities, and also Fair Share Scotland and Fairer Falkirk. They've worked very closely with them. They've extended their youth provision and are looking to do that going forward, working in partnership with Community Land Development Children's Services to do that in the coming year. And we will support them to establish a new youth work provision in the area, with the view that they will secure, Denny Community Support will secure external funding to continue and sustain that going forward. You can see on page 28 how the project contributes to the Falkirk Plans themes, and looking at that, you can see on page 30 the list of external funding. So for £23,000, they have managed to lever in roughly over £47,000 of an inward investment into the area for community projects, which I think has been fantastic. They're also part of a Forth Valley Health Board led research project, which has secured nearly £300,000 over the next 2.5 years to particularly look at health, weight and well-being, general health and well-being, but also obesity and weight reduction in the area. And they're one of the community projects that works with a community project doing at Westfield to look at how they can do that. And part of that money is about getting further service delivery coming in from Forth Valley NHS to provide different types of services that link to community link type work in the area. So it's really fantastic how they've been directly involved in that. This project worked really closely with the YMCA building. If any of your elected members are aware of it, it's very close to where Bridge Crescent is, and they've worked really collaborative with that YMCA grouping to bring in additional funding to the YMCA. That's allowed the YMCA to refurbish their building completely to make it a community meeting resource, and it's much larger than the flat area, so they can do large scale meetings there. And it's fantastic to see that they're taking a type of campus approach in the area to that, and it's been really well received by local people, and people are accessing it. The project certainly provides value for money. For the money that we give, we do give it. It allows them to access funding that the council wouldn't normally be able to do, to provide services that the council wouldn't normally be able to do in that local area. Quite happy to take questions on Denny Community Support Project, convener.
Do members have any questions?
I think Councillor Balfour's got his hand up, I think.
Councillor Balfour?
Yeah, thanks, convener. I see that it's got some information here about addiction support and counselling for local people. What kind of area of people does that cover? Is it just the immediate local area, or does it cover the whole of Falkirk area? Or?
it's supposed to just cover, and I use the term supposed to just cover Denny and Donny Pace area. However, there have been people accessing it from other areas as well, and that's primarily to do with stigma that goes around about this and accessing services locally, and they would rather travel to another place that doesn't necessarily know who they are or can identify them. So it has been used from across the council area as well. We do have similar services in Grangemouth and similar services in Laberton, Stenhousemuir as well, which are provided as well. And certainly working with NHS, we're continually reviewing where those services are and how they're delivered, and whether we need to look at other areas where the demand would need that, Councillor Balfour.
Okay, thanks for that.
Mark, is there a crossover between this organisation and the previous organisation being within the same locality?
Are you talking about the previous management committee that was there?
No, the previous organisation in Denny that we spoke about the first report.
Yeah, there's quite a distance between where they are. You know, there's a good couple of miles between, and they certainly serve different communities or neighbourhood areas. There is a sharing of skills, knowledge and expertise and resources from across, both from Denny Community Sport and Denny Lone Head area, but there is there's two different types of projects, to be honest with you. But they do share information and do share resources with each other to make sure that they've got the skills, knowledge and experience that's available in the communities they're working in.
Thanks, Mark. Can we move on to the next report, please?
Just getting there, just give me a second. My page is folded over. There we are. The Workers' Education Association. We've worked with the WEA for short for nearly 14 years now, and their type of work in the past was around about numeracy and particularly work-based numeracy. However, the demand for that service reduced as years progressed, and we refocused the work of the WEA to begin to really work with the most disadvantaged people and people who really need the type of work. So they moved into doing work with job clubs, what we call job clubs. So they worked in Bonnybridge, delivered the service in Denny and in Grangemouth and in Falkirk, and the work clubs were well received. However, it meant that the staff who were working with within the project did not have the time to do what we called intensive work with individuals who were furthest away from the job market, and we focused it down tightly. And also because they had funding reductions, that meant that they didn't have the same level of staffing that they previously had. So as you can see from the funding, they get £22,280, and you can see over the years that's stabilised. But the last 5 years ago they got 29,000, and before that they got 35,000. And certainly that's impacted on what the WEA can do working in partnership with ourselves. But you can see in the service delivery aspect that the Grangemouth Job Club has 13 adults that attend, 13 learners as I was describing it, and they're working on things like digital skills, job application, how they perform during an interview and preparing them for an interview. Major thing in the last couple of years has been that it's reduced the social isolation of those individuals who are meeting, and enabled them to move on, thankfully, to get employment. 2 of those 13 learners got employment as a direct result of coming there, and 2 of the learners got signposted to further digital learning delivered by CLD and by Forth Valley College. And a number of the learners then progressed on to voluntary placements within the community food pantry, which was fantastic for them. You can see some of the impact statement. I got the staff to put some of that impact statement in, so it gave you a flavour of the type of thing that the learners were doing and what they found useful about it and how it impacted on their lives. And some of them were saying, you know, that they've not got broadband in their houses, and this gave them an opportunity to access broadband, and it was just fantastic to see people, as well as doing some of the tests that they wanted to do, and increasing their employability. You can see that the workers have also been involved in a project which is called Thriving to Keep Well, it was in Camlin, where there was 10 learners involved in that, and they all went through a new award that's called the Adult Achievement Award, which CLD and the WEA delivered collaborative together. it's good to hear that the 10 learners all received that award and we got their accreditation, and as part of that the learners reported that they felt as though their life chances had increased, and what we mean by that is that they were able to go on to training, further education, some went to higher education, and some secured employment, and they felt a lot more confident, and that their mental health had been improved as a part of taking part of this course. And some of them described them actually becoming better parents. I should have really done this course myself. I think many years ago I would have been a better parent myself. And it just describes how some of them moved on to communication awards at level 4, which is quite a high SQA leveling for a lot of these people to move into. And it describes an impact statement there, and it's certainly describing they feel more confident they can help with their family. That's in itself is a fantastic achievement. Describes work that's happening in Denny in there, and describes what some of the learners have been doing. Also describes on page 37 that there was a project that a number of the learners got involved, which was postcards in the pandemic, which was funded by the Adult Learning Strategy, money that came out towards the end of last year. And there were 6 learners in that, and they contributed to stories and discussions and wrote postcards about their experience. And it was basically to create a social history archive to do that. You can see some of the other projects our staff have been involved in there on page 37 and page 38. A lot of the work is around supporting people with dyslexia and literacy support. So you can see that there's a statement there from one of the learners who comes from Grangemouth describing some of the work that they did with the staff there. So the project's been doing really, really good, and it's going to be picking up some of the work around with young lone parents, particularly dads, young men who are either with their children or are not necessarily included in the family life with the mother of the child and of the child as well. But we're going to be developing a project because that's come up as an unmet need, that there is work to be done with that, and the WA are going to look at how they're going to develop that with us as well. The skills that they've got is very much what a lot of these young dads are looking for, and can build that relationship and support them to get involved in that project. That will happen over the next year. Quite happy to take any other questions from councillors, their convener.
Councillor Kelly.
Hi. You say, are you expanding this to the smaller villages round about Denny and the area? I mean, Banknock, for instance, in my ward, a large village, there's quite a lot of unemployed, a lot of single mothers and that, and they could do with this WA help. Is there any plans to expand it out?
I'll answer that, Councillor Kelly, right now. I was in a meeting yesterday, which is Falkirk's Employability Partnership, and we were describing the type of work that the WA and other third sector providers do. And employment training, you were describing some of the funding that's available just now and around that, and we're waiting, as some electors members will be aware of, the UK Prosperity Fund announcement that's going to come towards the end of October. And we've put in an investment plan just now for that, and that'll allow us to look at this type of work being expanded into neighbouring villages like Banknock, you know, up in the Upper Braes as well. And Employment Training Unit are the organisation, the service that's coordinating part of that, and certainly we'll be looking at that, and we're actually doing an investment work plan workshop at our next meeting in the end of September, that'll look at where the emerging needs are and where the best place to do it. The challenge is the money that we'll get won't meet everyone's needs, and that some people might need to travel. There won't be anything on their doorstep all the time, and they might need to travel to a more central location to access that resource. But we'll do our best to provide a service that's pretty flexible and responds to their needs as far as what we can. I'm quite happy to update you on that individually, Councillor, if you would like any more information on that.
That'd be fantastic, Mark. When you say travel outwards, in areas like Banknock and the Braes, there's no public transport, or very little public transport, and it makes it really difficult, because perhaps we could have some sort of travelling roadshow around these places rather than in a fixed point. But I'd love to speak to you about that later sometime. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry, so I'll come back to you. Certainly we recognised yesterday that, you know, a lot of bus routes that ran maybe 10 years ago aren't running now, and we you know, to expect someone to travel a significant distance can be a challenge to them to get there, and hence why we're looking at ways that we can do outreach work from other locations to support individuals who require to access those types of services.
Councillor Denny.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mark, it's really interesting to find out, well, the initiatives this organisation's got, Workers Education Association, but must admit it's the first time I've heard of it. So I was wondering if it's possible for all the councillors in all the wards to find out about, have a map of all the community development projects that is going across the Falkirk Council area, so we see actually what is happening, because I think that would be really helpful, I believe, for all councillors to see what areas maybe have a little bit more development and what areas have less, so we have it maybe more equitable as we're moving forward. Would that be possible?
Certainly would. And myself and Jen Kerr, we mapped out a lot of the community development and projects that operate across the council area, but that was during the pandemic as we were trying to get our head around what's out there just now that we can actually support people to access those types of resources. That gets updated on a regular basis, and I say regular, it's every 6 months that we do it, because it takes quite a lot of input to keep that one live and real. And certainly Falkirk CVS have been champion in that, and I know that they were talking about putting stuff on their website that people can access there, so there was a list of groups and organisations and support. And if you like, Jen and I could go back and speak to CVS and see if it would be able to do that, and then we could direct elected members to that site to access resources, because it's once we circulate it to you, it's out of date type thing, because things change very, very quickly within communities, as you know. Whereas if we had it on a website, it can be updated periodically there, and you could get in real time.
I would really appreciate that. I think that would be helpful for all councillors. My second question, I know that that was a question really, but this one is on page 38. It's with regard to this organisation working in partnership with communities. It states here communication with communities is improved. Could you maybe explain how this is done, and what is the evidence we've got that apart from a few of the little initiatives we've got here where I do see some direct benefit, the dyslexic literacy support, I see that is obvious, but what is the evidence of that?
Yeah, I'll come in there, and I think Jen will come in just at the back of me, I think. So what the contribution that WEA makes there is they adopt, like other community and development services, they adopt what's called a social practice model. So it's not a curriculum that's set by the government or set by SQA that they necessarily follow. They very much focus on the curriculum around about what an individual wants to experience and what their life is like, and they focus the learning around about their life experiences and their life context. So someone may come and they may have a question for us, like, how can I access the centre more regularly? So rather than us telling them how they access it, we actually take them through a process of getting them to access it and supporting them to access it, so it becomes second nature and it's behavioural change for them, and they begin to great understanding. As part of that, they may well ask questions about Falkirk Council or another statutory provider, and the WA and the CLD staff support them to experience that type of question in their own context. So it's not actually given didactically to them. They actually say, right, what is it you want to access? I want to access social work services, right? How do you think you would go about that? And they would do that as an action research bit of project, so it actually changes behaviour, if that makes sense. So what we're actually doing, we've got the evidence of written work, we've got the evidence of feedback from the individual to tell them how it's improved for them. I'll pass you over to Jen now, because I know that she wanted to come in there to talk more openly about the Falkirk plan.
Yeah, so that theme one of the Falkirk plan was put into the Falkirk plan because as we listened to people through the development of it, we heard that we give a lot of information out to people as public services that doesn't really make a lot of sense to people, and they have to sift through it, and then they miss bits that are actually very relevant to them in their circumstances, just like Mark said. And then actually large mass outgoings of the communication isn't useful for people. It's one thing to give information, it's another to be able to use it, to have the confidence to use it, to know where things are when you need them. And that's where organisations like this are incredibly important, because they sift that information. They sift it from the CVS bulletin, they sift it from our information and our staff, and then ensure that the people they work with receive it in a way that supports them to use it, and then they support them to make the connections with that information. So it's really important that that's kind of personalized, like Mark said, but also is encouraging personal action rather than us telling someone what to do and then doing it for them. It's quite a behavior change approach.
Thank you. I was going to come back in there. Would it be okay? Yeah. So how do you keep the momentum up then? You know, how does that person continually improve, you know, with their communication?
It's all about having progression routes at the forefront of your mind when you're working with an individual like that, and thinking about, you know, one of the first questions that we get into is, where is it you want to go and what do you want to do with the things you're going to learn? So they actually have a learning plan, if that's the right way to describe it, so they know that they're on a journey. So someone can come in and they're struggling with dyslexia and literacy, that's reading and writing, and we support them with that, and we're thinking, right, the next place you can go, if that's what you'd so desire, would be to go to Forth Valley College, for example, to do another course there that could build on your core skills of literacy to do that. And, you know, the transformation we've seen in individuals who do that, it's not just about going on and improving their qualifications, it's about what they do in life-wide circumstances. So you can imagine their confidence increases, the way that they view certain things changes and behaviour changes, and that leads to better behaviour or more positive behaviour in family context. And that's not just with their children or their partners, it's more life-wide context as well, how they're able to communicate and interact with people. And it really is transformational. And certainly we've been involved with studies across Scotland for the last 4 years about what we call transformational evaluation with individuals and communities, that really looks at what from an individual's context and in their writing and in their language, describing the process that they went through and what benefit and difference it's made to them going through that process. So we've got all that evidence, Councillor, as well.
Thank you. Councillor Balfour.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, page 35, the Grangeworth Job Club, 13 learners. I just wondered if there was demand for more learners there, if they got that capacity, or can they take more people, or is there a demand there for more people to do some learning?
I certainly think in terms of the job club that there's been a drop-off in numbers, I would say, Councillor Balfour, in the last 5 years, and that's in part to the pandemic, but it's also in part to the range of provision that Employment Training Unit are now putting on, and the much more flexible approach that Employment Training Unit are now taking in terms of not just putting on programmes, they're putting on individualised learning. So it happens at the time and the place where those individuals want to go. A lot of the particularly male learners now go to Employment Training Unit. So they're actually, so it's not been counted here, it'll be counted in their report. And certainly the way that a lot of the existing learners that go to the WA's provision is through word of mouth and through community networks, and people saying that it's really good, it's okay to go there, you didn't feel judged, there's no stigma about going, and it's very much a social activity as well as a learning activity. So it's about trying to reduce social isolation and improve people's mental health. That's one of the outcomes, but it's no focused on mental health as such, if you understand what I mean. It's done by people coming collaborative together.
Okay. So is there anything, for example, for older people to learn some digital skills and things like that? I recently had a constituent contact me, and her husband had died, and she was basically left alone. She didn't have the digital skills to be on Facebook or anything like that, and she was looking for avenues to get out and meet some friends, sort of thing. She had no family, no friends in the area, or anything like that. Is there anything out there for older people to help them?
Yeah, if you get anybody like that in the future, Councillor Balfour, if you just want to refer them to myself either by a phone call or email and give me their contact details, and we'll put them in touch with our digital coordinator who works in partnership with a lot of third sector providers as well, to provide what we call digital champions. So they're champions who would meet face to face with an elderly person, either in their home or in a place that's appropriate to them, and begin to set them up with a digital device. They can sometimes get free digital devices from Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations through ourselves as well, and they get connectivity as well as part of that package, so they can do that, and they would get set up on a one-to-one basis, and then the learning or experiences would be provided remotely, like we are doing today, and they would learn to use that and build confidence and their competence to do that, and then they'd be encouraged to use that device life-wide, so that they contact their family, so that they can do some shopping online, they can do this, they can do that, and that's what we try to, that's a process they go through. But we do a lot of work with the third sector providers as well to try and deliver this, a lot.
Okay.
But if you get in contact with me in the future, Councillor Balfour, about that, we can do
Okay.
that.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Aitchison.
Thank you. Hi again, Mark. It's theme 3, outcome 12 at the bottom of page 38, mental health and wellbeing. And it says outcome 12, fewer people struggle with feeling social isolated and lonely, which is absolutely fantastic. But you're finding more and more people with mental health are looking to access the service, and if so, what provision are you offering to meet those needs, or never in the future, please?
I'll not just talk about certainly the projects that are listed here. I'll talk about community and development provision widely across the council, and Jen might well come in on this. Certainly we're picking up through engagement with individuals and also through family engagement that people have been negatively impacted in terms of mental health and well-being by the pandemic, but a lot of that is becoming emergent now and real to them. And certainly all of the CLD staff and all the CLD providers, both in statutory and in the third sector, are really aware of that. And certainly all the staff have been trained in mental health and well-being and how they can promote it, and the ways that their activities that they're engaging with individuals can promote, well, simply the 5 ways to well-being, and that addresses mental health as well, which is about, you know, taking part, being active, taking notice of things round about you, giving back to other people. And, you know, certainly our programmes are evaluated on that 5 ways to well-being model, which is a nationally recognised model. And certainly, but yeah, there has been an increase in, and Robert might come into that, to answer your question as well. There's high levels of young people reporting through various studies that their mental health has been significantly impacted negatively as a direct result of being, but there's also adults that have that as well. But I think it's mostly young people that's getting the publicity at the moment, whereas there's an adult population that's been impacted as well. And certainly we're looking to expand and work with communities to see what can be provided, and we've got social prescription workers as well within each of the communities that's linked to various health centres as well. And I know that they're going to be expanding. The numbers of them are going to be expanding over the next few years as well, which is fantastic in terms of investment. But what we do need is communities to come together to look at how they can provide services as well with themselves, and we're supporting that to build the capacity, and Jen's team's doing that as well, how we can do that. Jen, I know you've got your hand up. I don't know if you want to come in now.
Sure, I just maybe wanted to add some kind of data around some of what you were describing there, Mark. So pre-pandemic, the Health and Social Care Partnership was working with third sector partners and other public sector partners to look at isolation of elderly people. It was such an issue. We knew isolation is very bad for your health. It's worse than smoking. It can kill. So isolation and being at home and not being able to connect was a problem. During and post-pandemic, everyone was reporting that, all age groups, all sectors of society, lots and lots of people reporting isolation, people working at home all day for various different reasons. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about belonging, a sense of belonging to something, participating in your community, in your neighborhood, in your ethnic group, in your interest groups. And so people participating in strong networks and strong communities, and anything that encourages and supports, like we were talking about, encouraging someone to actually go along to an activity and join in, or be confident enough to go to a job club for the first time. It's not easy to walk through a door when you don't know anyone. That stuff is what's really important. And if we can support people to in fact, isolation is probably one of our priorities to prevent mental ill health. And at our recent community planning board, we had our suicide prevention coordinator talking about something like participating in a litter pick can prevent a suicide if it helps someone feel like they belong to something. It's that simple. It's about people belonging, having friends, having a sense of purpose.
Sorry, can I just come back on that for a wee second? Yeah, that's absolutely great, but we're talking about communities coming together and people accessing services and things. But people can't travel, and it's a point that was already raised beforehand, if people can't travel to access these services via public transport and whatever else, they're not going to be any use to people. You know, we have to go to the people, not the people come to the services, and that's what we really need to appreciate. We have our localities, but everything can't be central in each locality. We have to access the people so people can use the services.
That's a very good point you've raised there, Councillor. And certainly a lot of the community centres that are within each of the areas do offer these types of opportunities for people to come together. It might not have an over 50s group, but they'll have a knit and natter group, for example, or they might have a regular coffee mornings, or they've got activity groups for individuals to access as well. And it's trying to promote that across and make people aware of that, because the amount of people, I don't know, when I was working as a community worker, the amount of people that used to walk past the centre and never ever think what's going on in there, can I access that, until I actually was walking in the car park. I remember walking in the car park speaking to a group of young mothers who were pushing their prams down there. I said, do you realise there's a mothers and toddlers group in here? And they went, no. And I said, you can come and get it. You come and is it, but what are they like? Are they good people? I said, I didn't care. I think they are, but you can come and judge for yourself. And they accessed it, and they became the chairperson and treasurer of the group years later. You know, they moved on, and they stayed within the group as long as they needed it, when their kids were toddlers. And as their kids moved into youth work and children's work, they moved with them and became volunteers in the centre. So it's a good way to get people in the door to that. And it's just raising awareness all the time. And certainly we're learning how to use social media to try and promote more access and more prominence of groups that are there. And certainly that's a process that we're going to continue to do to try to do it. But some of it is, you get people arriving at a centre or meeting you and they're saying, you know, I've got my son, he's really a bit of a pain just now. I'd like him to get involved in things. What things are available in the communities? So you find out where they're living, what type of thing, and you offer that opportunity, and then you raise awareness with volunteers and youth workers in the centres that this young person is going to come along, and it make them feel welcome. And that's the way we try to do it. But we do try to have things on people's, not necessarily a doorstep, but within the community centre that's available. We also use schools as well. So you've got Denny Wider Access to School project, which is a project in Denny WASP, and they provide resources for adults to come, particularly elderly people, to come and access that as well. And that's reopening, and we're working with the school to try and increase access to that centre. And we would love to do that across the piece with some of the schools as well. And we do that with some of the primary schools as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that volunteers are always the biggest problem in keeping groups going, but thanks very much. Cheers.
Matt, just following on your point there about obviously the locality, and as Councillor Aitchison said, people actually accessing these services. Reading the reports, it seems to be there's similar areas where there's a heavy focus, Denny, Grangemouth, Falkirk. When it comes to like my ward, which is Upper Braes, there's very limited classes in the community centres. Why is that not been the same focus and the same targets not been rolled out wider to these communities?
Part of it from Children's Services CLD perspective is that, you know, certainly we're charged through the CLD regulations, and the CLD plan has to go there, that we have to target areas that have significant disadvantage and are experiencing inequality. It's not to say that the Upper Braes area isn't experiencing that, but the higher levels are certainly down in Grangemouth, Denny, and parts of Falkirk town centre areas. Certainly, so that's the first thing we begin to target. But there's other areas that we do want to work in, and certainly if there's a need that comes, for example, up in Shield Hill, Slomanin, Avon Bridge, then we will work with the management committees to try to meet that need and put provision on. We'll try to recruit volunteers to develop that, and we've done that extensively in the last year with a lot of the youth work that's going on in the areas. It's all run by volunteers with a member of staff working in the evenings from community land development, but you've got roughly 6 or 7 volunteers delivering that service, and we want to try and roll that out for adults as well and look at how we can do that. But certainly if you're aware of any emerging needs up in the Upper Braes, then I'd be happy to talk to you, convener, about that and see how we can try and meet those needs there.
Definitely, because as we've pointed out, the public transport situation at the moment is a huge problem, and it's only going to get worse. And you know, there's not a lot to do in these rural communities, so the community centres and the schools need to be utilised to provide classes, activities for all ages. And I think there's a focus needs to be on the Upper Braes at the moment to try and drive that, to bring people into these facilities and use them. So yeah, I'll have a chat with you after that. That'd be great, Mark.
Look forward to that.
Any more questions? Can you move on to the next report, please?
I'll hand it over to Jen, because Jen's going to speak to CVS's report now.
Okay, hi everyone. So this report's about CVS Falkirk and District, which is our third sector interface for Falkirk area. This organisation has a range of funders from both the Scottish Government, who funds the Third Sector Interface Network. They work closely with the Health and Social Care Partnership and also receive funding from them, as well as from Falkirk Council. So we contribute through a joint working agreement to this organisation's objectives, which are aligned to the Falkirk Plan, and support it. In this particular financial year, this organisation is still working very closely with the wider third sector around the recovery from COVID. And by third sector, we include community groups, voluntary organisations, registered charities, and not-for-profit companies such as community interest companies within that. So they support social enterprise development as well as community development, as well as third sector service providers. Just so you're aware that that's quite a range and quite a different range of target audiences. However, all of those audiences need similar things. They need organizational technical skills capacity. They need to be able to manage staff. They need to be able to attract funding. They need to be able to monitor and evaluate their work. In order to do that, they need to run organizations legally and compliantly. So CVS Falkirk and third sector interfaces more generally take up that role of supporting our sector to organizationally develop and grow. It's kind of like business support, but for charities and third sector. They also manage the volunteer centre service and advertise and promote local volunteering opportunities to people and meet people on a one-to-one basis to become and get involved in volunteering. In addition, they have this function of sort of managing information as much as possible about the third sector. So they do manage a list of third sector organisations in as best as possible, which is why I was smiling when you asked for that. I was like, oh, if only. It's a very difficult task. It's an ongoing task. There is a directory on the CVS website that does contain that list. And again, it's not exhaustive, and they do commit quite a significant amount of time to keep that as up to date as possible. But one thing about the third sector is it's incredibly adaptable, so it changes pretty regularly. When there's a need, they go off and fill it. We learned that during the pandemic. So currently, this organisation has been supporting the Community Planning Partnership as well to bring together these networks of third sector organisations, service providers. As Mark mentioned, we work very closely with a network of a range of types of providers. They come together, they discuss and share issues that they're seeing, gaps in people's needs, similar things we've talked about today. They work with ourselves, they work with other partners as well through these forums to work together and come up with solutions for them, seek funding for them. We did that very, very effectively during the pandemic, where we met daily as a sector, as a group of sectors to come together to identify who could do what was needed, where we heard there were problems. So they're a very important organization in that they provide us with a link to the third sector, and that they coordinate and support the third sector to understand. And they also take the understanding from the front line of the third sector, which is an extension of public services, back into our planning processes. In particular, in this year, they were instrumental in involving third sector and volunteers in our community development process for the Falkirk Plan. They helped us engage through their forums as to what was needed, raising that issue about isolation that I talked about earlier. Their particular technical skills, they support technical management of organizations and the development of organizations, which is a huge need in Falkirk. Our organizations here are primarily volunteer-led. They don't employ a lot of staff, and as a result, we have lots of volunteer recruitment, and we have a great volunteer area, like loads of people volunteering, but actually we need some paid staff in those organizations. We need them to be able to employ staff of their own to do things for their communities, the things we're talking about. We want to support that. We want to support sort of localized anchor groups and networks and organizations. And we want them to be independent, and we want to support the amazing community leadership that we saw during COVID. It's there, it's skilled, it wants to do things. We need to help that happen. So in partnership with the CLD colleagues, CVS Falkirk have been providing leadership training to local community leaders. And in this financial year, that's coming together in a local leadership network, where local leaders from different communities, community hubs, community halls, community organizations, food organizations can come together and talk about their common issues together, and then we can all help and support in the background to address those with them. The idea being, though, that they are strong, independent organizations that do things that are best for their communities, and our role is to enable that, whether it's through funding, whether it's through community capacity building, whether it's through organizational development and support, policy support, whatever it needs. They're an integral part of our understanding of our local area and of local people. They employ, I think, about 11 staff at this point in time. They had a difficult year this year, a very difficult year. As you may be aware, their chief officer was very poorly and off work for 6 months of this financial year, during which time they had an interim CEO brought in through a national organization to see the organization through a very critical time. The chief officer has been back in post now since September, and things are progressing, and quite satisfied that that was well managed during that time. But I would need to raise it, I feel, at Scrutiny as a potential risk in that organisation last year, which was well managed, kept in regular contact with us and did not affect their services. I think the numbers in the report speak for themselves. The wide range of groups and organisations they work with well extend the capacity and size of that organisation, and they provide us with a lot of contact and a lot of support to some of these groups that our own staff and services couldn't possibly do. The other area that I'd wish to highlight from the report is their focus on funding and funding support. So this organisation during the pandemic brought in a lot of funding to the area, but also became very skilled at distributing funding very quickly to the third sector. They did that for us as Falkirk Council in the previous year, which we reported on. In this past financial year, they did it with additional funds, and Scottish Government is looking more and more at the third sector interface to distribute national funding at a very local level. So in this financial year, we had the Wellbeing Fund as well as the Community Learning and Development Fund that they worked in partnership with our CLD staff on to organise at very short notice. We were one of the few local authority areas in Scotland that were able to access that money. It was about £45,000 that went out to groups and organisations and supported some of that digital work Mark talked about as well. In order to, because we have a good relationship and we have an established infrastructure for providing funding that's audited and has been now for a couple of years. So as an infrastructure body, they are effectively our largest anchor organisation in the third sector in the community. It's important that they are an independent organisation, but a good quality partner as well. And through that, we have shared working objectives and our joint working agreement for those commitments. And we make this contribution to support that, to enable their participation in our partnerships, in our community planning partnership in particular, in which they take a lot of leadership work and roles. Any questions?
Members have any questions? Councillor Bennett?
Yeah, I've got a question. Yeah, I must admit, you know, I've worked with CVS in the past. They are a very good anchor organisation, but today, actually in the report, and yourself, Jen, you've talked about volunteering a lot. I know CVS does try to encourage, you know, a lot of volunteering. That one thing I've noticed, we don't seem to have. We talk about volunteering just about in every sentence there, but we don't have any data as to the numbers of volunteers. But my question is, I mean, during the pandemic, there was a lot of youth volunteers out there, basically. However, now that we're back to normal, has that changed? Has numbers remained static? Has it decreased? Has it increased? Do we know the reasons why these people put themselves out there? And they all went above and beyond, actually, during the pandemic. That community spirit was there. It was alive. It was there. It helped us through it. So I would like to find out the reasons why, you know, people have left volunteering, because, as you say, they've picked up a wee bit of skills there, actually, and they would get to know the community more. So I would like to find out why they're not volunteering now. And if they're not volunteering now, what can CVS do to encourage them maybe to come back out volunteering, actually, and have an input in their community? That's my question.
Okay, so that's really about the motivations of volunteers, and during the pandemic, and any emergency for that matter, it's always very different than it is on a day-to-day basis. There's actually been a lot of studies commissioned during and towards the end of the pandemic there, and I can share some of that research with you. A lot of that is about the sense of emergency, and a sort of sense of self all of a sudden emerges during an emergency that's very different from a day-to-day one. But ultimately, people want to help others. That's really lovely and positive to see. But during the pandemic, there's the emergency factor, but plus people had more time, they were home and they wanted to, and there was a call to action, a national call to action, 10,000 people signed up across the country. So part of the COVID Volunteer Centre aspect of this report was managing that offer. And actually CVS regularly said thank you to people, even though they weren't needed, because it was, you know, the third sector interfaces received that national cohort of registrations from the Scottish Government. We had 750, I think, from memory, and actually we'd already signed up 400 people in the first 3 weeks. There wasn't actually a lot people could do, so they managed that thank you. They kept in touch with them. They offered them alternatives, but as people went back to work, back to their daily lives, time is always a factor. But this importance of community activity, of community belonging and participation is kind of where CVS is focusing on. We can ask people, we can put the ask out, we can promote, we can encourage people to get involved, but ultimately it's their neighbors that are going to ask them and encourage them. It's the person walking by the community center that says, come in and join them. And all of a sudden you're a secretary 5 weeks later, which is how I ended up being a beaver leader this year. I was like, wait a second, how did I end up here? Somebody I knew encouraged me to get my son involved, and all of a sudden I'm running a group. And I was like, that's how volunteering happens. It happens through your social networks. It happens through the things that affect your life on a daily basis. That's when people get involved. So young people tend to get involved around their children's activities, or they tend to get involved around the professional skill sets they have, or they see a need and they want to help it. During the pandemic, people saw a very different need and wanted to help, and that's fantastic. It really renewed everyone's faith in humanity. On regular times, we need to encourage people and want people to talk to their neighbors. You know, people stopped knocking on doors and saying, how you doing? After the pandemic, that continued, which is great. So it's that sense of we can create the conditions, we can encourage and promote, but actually we need neighborhoods to develop their own capacity, their own social networks, to get people involved, even if it's in a knitting club, because that knitting club could be a route into participating in something else, doing a litter pick the next week, joining a committee the week after that, because so-and-so knows someone that can do accounts in this group or that group. That's how volunteering develops in a community, and it develops through people. We can't actually pay for that. We can't buy it. We can only encourage it to happen and point out the need for it to happen. And usually when you ask someone, 80% of them will get involved. And we know that from evidence and from facts. But I'll share with you some of I'll send you some links from some of the research that came out of the pandemic that kind of points to that. But it is a very different circumstance than general community development promotes volunteering.
Thank you. My other question is regarding the volunteer. You know, I speak to a lot of people in the community every day and things like that. But you know, there is a lot of people out there that would like to help, would like to volunteer. So, say I've got a lady, you know, over 65 living in the high-rise flat. She would like to befriend. Some of these people don't know how to go about it, where to look, things like that. So what are we doing to raise awareness of that for all our communities and all the types of volunteering? Is there a central point? I mean, not everybody knows to look at CVS website. You know, I mean, if you say it's in to look at a website, they don't know it's there. They don't know how to look there, do they? So we need to find a mechanism where people can see what sort of volunteering there is out in our Falkirk Council area, and I don't know how that can be done. Not lots of different things, but maybe a more single thing so that it's easy to find and people can have a look at it and decide.
So during the pandemic, one of the volunteer centre reports there about COVID is a Volunteer Falkirk website was set up, which advertises these organisations. There's a national infrastructure through that database that keeps a list of the organisations and their volunteering opportunities. But that requires formal registration with the volunteer centre. They do provide a matching service. So if you've got an individual that would like to become a volunteer, give them CVS's number. They'll send someone else to speak to them in a place that's suitable for them. They'll understand what it is they want to get from it. So if it's to reduce isolation and loneliness, they're not going to encourage them to volunteer in a back room in the archives, for example. They'll match them up to something that will benefit them, that they'll enjoy, that they'll keep doing. So there are resources out there, but that's the point about we can only promote that. We need people to know. We need local communities as well, if they want to volunteer locally in their own community, to be able to say, we're here, we need help, please come and help us. A lot of it actually comes down to communication and being welcoming. It is hard to start volunteering. It's something new, it's different people, again. So there's Volunteer Falkirk website, there's the CVS phone number, but again, if you refer them to us, we can pass people on to that. If they have a particular disability, it might be better if they start through an organization that's more open to the understanding of the barriers that might present for them, who would then also have the skills to put them into a role to address some of their barriers and find the additional, offer them the additional support. So there's a range of services out there to do that. It's just about knowing who to connect them to. And most service providers in our area, whether they're in our Falkirk Council, Health and Social Care, or in the third sector, know those routes in. So probably contact anyone that works with people at the front line in community work would be able to help you to do that. But Volunteer Falkirk website is a good place to start.
Thank you.
Councillor Balfour.
Thanks, convener. Just a few things. I'm going to go back onto the isolation thing with particularly older people. The woman I mentioned earlier, she's active, she can get out, but she was actually talking about maybe volunteering as well. I did manage to speak to a couple of local organisations who were going to contact her and see about getting her along and maybe getting her volunteering and whatever else. But there must be a lot of other people out there. I know of people who've lost their husband or whatever quite recently. They're maybe active and can get out. However, they've got anxiety issues, so they can't get out. Or there's maybe people who have got a disability and can't really get out, and they're maybe sitting for days or weeks at a time and see nobody. Councillor Aitchison mentioned earlier the transport issues, so they can't get from their home to the support or service or whatever. But there's people that have got, like I said, anxiety and stuff. They can't get out, whether they've got transport or not, or they're maybe disabled and they can't get out. How do we get to these people?
So generally, most of those people, and I say most, not all, are known to services and are working with services for specialists. So if they've got additional needs, and some of them are much more significant and more complex as well as others. So in particular, like for Grangemouth, for example, we've got the Older People's Welfare Service who provide a specific lunch club with specialist transport that can take people with complex disabilities out of their home, and they're trained to do that safely. They've got special risk assessments to be supporting people to go to the bathroom, for example, in a lunch club or an activity club, because if you've got complex disabilities, it adds a whole other dimension to people who can volunteer in the support and the safety aspect of that. So they do receive support for that. They're generally known, but because it's a little bit more complex, it does require a lot more planning. So we do have some groups that do that already. If you feel there's people that aren't involved in services that aren't, I would say encouraging that link is the first step. Any service, and again, there's different types of organisations to support different people with different barriers to do things in groups. So we've got FDAM, for example, where if someone's kind of got low-level anxiety or just a lack of confidence even around social anxieties, they've got sort of peer groups that will go off and volunteer to do things together in a group. So there is stuff out there, but it's about encouraging and supporting someone to go to them for the first time. That is really the biggest barrier. Getting someone to go try something new is hard for everybody. So if you've got a barrier of anxiety to go along with that, it makes it 3 times as hard, if not more. So there is stuff out there. Again, it's just about knowing the right referral routes in for people. And usually that's a local service of some sort. So again, if it's a particular issue like anxiety, FDAM would probably be the first place to start, because they'll know the networks of people that can help that. Mark, did you want to add to that? You're on mute, Mark.
The first time today I've been quiet, Jenny. Yeah, RVS and Falkirk certainly do a lot of outreach work where they've got volunteers who give up their free time to go out and contact elderly people who are maybe socially isolated within their own home and for a variety of reasons don't want to leave their own home for a number of reasons, and they build relationships with them, but they're ultimately trying to encourage them to go out, maybe go for a cup of coffee, go for a cup of tea, or just a walk outside in their community. That's what they're trying to do. So it's that first stages of trying to support them to make that transition outside rather than staying in all the time. But RVS, if you want, Councillor Balfour, I'll give you the contact details of them if you come across any people like you described. Certainly RVS are the people that do it, and they do it with volunteers, so that they actually hope that the person that they're working with becomes a volunteer to support others eventually as well.
Right, that'd be very useful. Just another thing that Councillor Binney mentioned about having the information available to people. A while ago, Eastern Partnership Council, they had a system where there was a touchscreen computer in the libraries and the doctor surgeries, etc. And on that was a list of basically anything you wanted, anything from hairdressers, if you want to go and get your eyes checked. It all started off through an NHS thing, but I don't think it's operating now, but they're still looking into it. But it had everything on it. It had different shops for food, if you wanted shoes, and all you had to do was just go in and click your area or what you wanted, food, etc., and it would come up with a list. You would click on your area and it would give you a list on a map of all the different places and whatever, Boys Brigade, different churches, you name it, it was on there. And the public could actually put in to add things on there. So if a new shop appeared, they could add that in. And it had this for the whole of Eastern Barton. You could click on anything at all. And that was absolutely fantastic, and to get people information right away. And it was just a nice big screen in the library on a flexible arm. So if somebody came in a wheelchair, for example, they could just pull the screen down to their level. So, I mean, that I've actually asked about that in the past for, like, say, Grangemouth Town Centre and elsewhere, but nothing's really happened with it yet. One other quick question: the woman I mentioned earlier, what she did ask was, "Is there a Scrabble club?" And I could not answer her. Is there one that you know of?
No, but that's a great idea. Get in touch with Mark's team about
I know a lot.
that.
I know a lot of
Easy
people
answer.
like Scrabble, and if they had
Yeah.
a Scrabble club, then that might be one that they could go to as well. So, yeah, okay.
Councillor Bath, if you give me the contact details of that woman, I'll get in touch with
Yeah.
her and talk to her about setting up a Scrabble club with her. If that's something she wants to do.
Right,
she can do it.
I did ask her that, but she didn't seem very keen to do it. I think she's really elderly, to be honest. I think she was about 79 or something, she said. But she wanted to do some kind of volunteering, I think, and just get involved in different things. So, but I'll pass on her details anyway, and you might be able to help her out with something. So, okay, thanks for that.
Thank you.
Again, if I can reiterate, if we had good, strong anchor organizations running halls and community organizations, they could have a Scrabble night that could turn into a club type thing. So this is the kind of stuff we want to bring people together around, things that interest them. And then what happens from there is always usually pretty remarkable. So if I can come back in on the information point that you raised, I can't remember the name of that project, but was involved with it for about 5 to 6 years. The amount of money, resource, and politics that went into that was incredible, which is why it stopped. And it involved the national infrastructure data around the third sector interfaces. It's called Milo, is the database. There's about 5 or 6 national databases, and then the NHS created a secondary one. And it would, you know what, the thing is a shame because it worked for people, and it was an amalgamation of different places. And unfortunately, it just took so much time and effort. Because information management is very difficult to do, especially at a national level, that it stopped. But there's similar types of stuff around, and we have looked at some pulling together, but it requires incredible amounts of resources to maintain that.
Yeah.
But that was a national and a local.
I did some of the IT stuff in the background for Eastern Barton at the time, and I put the machines in and things like that. So it was a very, very good system.
It is, and it
involved a lot of
potential. Pulling from a huge range of national and local databases and putting them together. And then of course people started arguing about data sharing, but it is possible, but yeah, it is possible. And again, locally, we're all pretty good about sharing, but even during the pandemic, I mean, Mark had one member of staff, that's all she did was gather information, call back every day and check it was up to date, just so we made sure that we knew everything was accurate. But it is an intensive job, information management. But having an interface to do it with, that is probably possible. And Mark, let's mention that to Sally, our new library head or new libraries manager.
Yeah, I mean, there might be a kind of cut down version that we can do to point people in the right sort of place. And then if we can get a PC or link to that in libraries, local libraries and something like that, it'd be very, very useful.
Great. Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Any more questions?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Back on the last question I asked, and it says about data for volunteers. I mean, would that be possible? I mean, it's like the live volunteers we've got in it. Some have fallen back and no longer volunteers. But it's actually to get a picture. I mean, how do you know how well we're doing? actually encouraging volunteers, you know, out there if we don't have any numbers. I mean, it might be quite difficult, the process, but, you know, for example, we've only got 100 here, maybe in comparison to Stirling Council, they've got 1,000 volunteers. Nobody's monitoring that, you know, that data. Is it important? Well, it is important if you want to encourage more volunteers if we've not got enough. And I know it comes from the person, I know what you're saying, Jen, that, you know, we can't make people be volunteers, but we don't have any data, but we talk about volunteers all the time. So it seems strange we don't have any data. You know, we're just talking about volunteers, but if there's no data, and there's no evidence that there is lots of volunteering happening in Falkirk Council, I understand that.
But if I can answer that. So there is some data. It's not accurate because we have the Scottish Household Survey every 2 years, asks across the country who participates in activities in their community, I think is the language they use. We divide volunteering into formal and informal, and 80% of volunteering is informal, and most people wouldn't consider themselves volunteers, so they don't declare that. But that data has been collected now for about 15 years. Statistically, it's pretty accurate. Falkirk is about 25%, which is just really below the national average for what we should have in terms of our data. There's very specific patterns around volunteering. If you're rural, if you're female, you're more likely to volunteer. Likewise, if you're more middle class, you're more likely to volunteer. However, Falkirk, when you break down that data, actually bucks a lot of those trends. We have more volunteering happening across a range of urban and rural areas by lower income people. That's quite unique to Falkirk. However, we also have some of the lowest levels in the country, which is not characteristic of our area, but we know that's actually not necessarily the case when we actually go out into communities and talk to people. There is so much going on, and I think it's just people don't see themselves as volunteers. So CVS also undertake an annual impact report on the third sector, and that's another source where we can kind of triangulate and pull information from, and that's how we know that the majority of our third sector is actually volunteer-led. We have a very small service sector compared to other parts of Scotland and a huge community sector. Lots of people are doing lots of things, and it's time for us to support them, to formalise that a bit and give them some help in the background so that they can do more of those things and rely less on the council to be the host and the organisers of all of those things. They want to do it for themselves, but they haven't got that background. The more we can ask locally, the more formalized that is, the better we can ask them to help us collect that information. But generally, we're about 25%, which is just 25 to 27 is the national average. It goes up and down. And Falkirk's been pretty consistent with the exception of 1 year, which was a complete statistical anomaly. We were the highest in the country for 1 year, and then it stopped. It was about 2 years before the pandemic, and it went back to 25 the next household after that. So we do have some data, but no one collects it nationally. It's very difficult to do. It's significantly acceptable just because it's been going on for so long, but we sit in around about the national average, but we're very unique, Falkirk, and I think it's a bit of a testament to the CLD work in the area that we get a lot of different people out participating and volunteering than other areas do. It's not our usual suspects.
Thank you.
Thanks. I think that's us come to the end of the reports. I don't think there's any more questions from members. So having heard all the reports, we turn to the recommendations in the report. And the recommendations, there's two parts. Members happy to note the report and acknowledge the progress made in each of the organisations we've heard about today, or otherwise, are we going to ask for further information? Now, nothing's come forward during the debate, so I suspect that it's the first part that you're just happy to note the reports. Mark, I did undertake to come back with a map of locations of voluntary organisations, but that's something that will just be provided out with the committee. So if members are content just to note the report and acknowledge the organisation's progress.
Agreed.
Thank you. And that concludes the meeting. So I thank officers for attending and members, but I'm going to ask if the committee can stay online and just for a couple of minutes after the meeting, if the members online can stay as well. That's the end of the meeting.
Thanks, everyone.